Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's special presentation on the National Farm to School Network's Racial and Social Equity Tool for Farm to School Programs and Policy. This presentation is co-hosted by the Michigan Farm to Institution Network and the Michigan Local Food Council Network. My name is Colleen Matz, and I'm the Farm to Institution Specialist at the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. I'm also coordinator of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network, which is a space for learning, sharing, and working together to help farm to institution programs grow. Our local food purchasing campaign, Cultivate Michigan, helps institutions find, buy, promote, and track more local foods as they work toward the Michigan Good Food Charter goal of 20% Michigan foods by 2020. I'll be the facilitator for the presentation today, and I'll turn it over to my co-host, Megan Masson-Minnock, who will be the moderator for today's presentation.
Hi, thanks, Colleen. I'm Megan Masson-Minnock. I'm the co-facilitator of the Michigan Local Food Council Network. The network brings together food councils to build their individual and collective capacities to work on food and food policy issues, operate effectively, and engage their communities through peer-to-peer learning. Many of our local Michigan food councils support farm-to-school programs and have racial and social equity as a key component of their work. So we're excited to be part of this program today. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Colleen.
Thanks, Megan. And for the folks who are on the line with us today, if you're willing, please do go ahead and introduce yourself to the group through the chat box by providing your name, your role, and your affiliation. And otherwise, your role for today is to actively listen and ask questions through the chat box when they come up for you. Our presenters will share their tool and have some discussion for some time, and then we'll take questions before the end of the hour. So once it's time, be sure to type your questions into the chat box, and our moderator will share them with our speakers. Feel free to type them as they come to you, and we'll do our best to keep track of them so you don't lose a burning question if you have one. So please go ahead and introduce yourselves now. I see we're getting started there. Thank you. And with that, I wanted to also introduce our presenters for today. Alena Paisano serves as the program manager with the National Farm to School Network, where she focuses on supporting producers seeking to build farm to school relationships and Native communities seeking to expand and sustain farm to school activities as a strategy for advancing food sovereignty. Alena is also an experienced practitioner of farm to school, dedicated to the development of just and local food systems, serving our youth, families, and communities now and for future generations. Helen Dombalis serves as the new Executive Director for the National Farm to School Network. In her role, Ellen collaborates with stakeholders nationwide to explore and execute farm to school innovation, programming, and advocacy to advance racial and social equity and to grow and sustain the farm to school movement. She's a native of Raleigh, North Carolina, and she received her Master of Public Health and Master of Social Work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's now based in Colorado. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, hi, everyone. This is Helen Dombalis, as Colleen just said, the Executive Director of the National Farm to School Network. And I just want to start by thanking Colleen and Megan and Michigan State University for inviting us to share this tool today. We are going to dig into talking about why National Farm to School Network created this tool, as well as some information about our journey. You know, as a national network, it's important for us to tell the story, not only of the work we're doing now to put equity into action through programs and policy, but also tell the behind the scenes look at what it's taken for us as an organization to get to this point, because we want to inspire you all to do this work in your own organizations and communities as well. And certainly MFU has been a demonstrated partner and leader in advancing equity through its work, including with Farm to School. So I'm going to start by just explaining for those of you who may be new to the National Farm to School Network a bit about who we are, because it's relevant to what I was just saying about putting equity into action. So we are, as our name implies, a national network. So we have staff, including Alena and myself, more than 20,000 network members. If you're not a network member, you can go to farmtoschool.org and join. It's free. And then we have core and supporting partner organizations. So these are other organizations and entities around the country at the state level So MSU is our core partner organization, for example, in the state of Michigan. And then we have an advisory board. So these are folks that are leaders in food systems and sustainable agriculture and support our work. And I bring this up because, again, I think it's important to understand that NFSN is committed to advancing equity since our founding. It's embedded in our core values, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's relevant to understand that for all of us, whether we work at national organizations, state organizations, community-based organizations, agencies, and so forth, that we have others that are looking to us and learning from us. And so for NFSN as a national network, that's what we realized, is that we couldn't just do this work and go on this equity journey, but that we needed to tell that story to inspire others. And so I just want you all to think about your roles in your organizations and communities, and how after today's webinar, you can really take this back to the work of your organizations and communities. So on this next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that journey. So National Farm to School Network was founded in 2007, and then in 2010, we developed a core values document. So really going back nearly a decade now, those core values include acknowledging, for example, that local food should be available in all schools to nourish every child, regardless of race and ethnicity, economic standing, or geographic location. So local food procurement is one of what we call the core elements of Farm to School, along with gardens and food and agriculture education. So the point here really is to show that from the outset, we were committed both to racial equity and social equity. And I'll talk more about that in a minute as part of our journey, but recognizing that that core element of Farm to School needed to be available to all children everywhere. And another example from our core values is the fact that a goal is to strengthen the Farm to School movement while keeping intact the unique flavor and diversity of individual Farm to School programs and communities. And the point there is that since our founding, and this rings true still today, that Farm to School is not a one-size-fits-all model. Every community has its own needs, has its own assets. And so therefore, our role is really to serve as this national clearinghouse and convener and communicator about Farm to School and for Farm to School, but recognizing that every community has different assets and different needs. And so that really speaks to the emphasis that we have on diversity, on equity, and on inclusion in our work. So beginning just a few years after that, in 2013, we started to try out trainings and having discussions. So we have annual meetings. I mentioned that we have these core and supporting partners in every state. So we gather those around 200 partners every year, and we started doing these trainings. We wanted to start talking about equity and the relevance of equity to the day-to-day work that all of us are doing. And I should update this slide, in fact, because we did host another one of these trainings at our most recent annual meeting last month. The staff also started to, beginning in 2014, have trainings, and now I'm excited to share that every single month, the national staff for the National Farm to School Network have devoted equity calls. So that looks different in different months. It may mean that we talk about terms and definitions. So what does prejudice look like, and how does that play out in Farm to School? Or what does implicit bias mean, and what does that look like in the context of Farm to School? So every single month, beginning in 2017, staff have an hour devoted to talk about equity. What are we reading? What's come up in the news that's relevant? And then through Food Systems New England, we have now been participating in equity challenges. So every April, they host a 21-day equity challenge. So you get different prompts every morning for 21 days. And it's something that staff and our partners have been engaging in and participating in since. The point here, as with our staff calls, as with these trainings, this work doesn't just happen because we're committed to it. You have to actually put equity, and we'll talk about this more with the development of the tool, you have to put equity into action. You have to show through your daily work, your daily conversations, you know, if you're a person like myself who's white, that you are an ally, and that's what being an ally means. It's really putting that daily intentional commitment to advancing equity through our practitioner work that we're doing. So that's really the point behind explaining this part of the journey, is to show that you have to step up, you have to do it regularly, or it's not going to get done. And that's the work that it takes. A few other examples of our equity journey, including a priority on work with Native communities since 2014. Alena is heading up that work for NFSN, so can certainly speak more to that. But as you all are likely well aware, Native communities are disproportionately impacted by a number of diet-related diseases, poverty, hunger, and other social challenges. And so there was a recognition that NFSN, beginning in 2014, really hadn't intentionally understood the unique barriers to farm to school in these communities, and really wanted to start working with these communities to come up with solutions and share best practices. In 2016, we launched a Farm to Early Care and Education Cultural Relevancy subgroup. So Farm to Early Care and Education is really farm to school at that 0 to 5 age group, preschools, daycare centers, Head Start, early Head Start, recognizing that it's really important, especially in procurement, to focus on cultural relevancy. So taking into context things like who the children are that are being served. And this is not just in ECE, this is also important to do in K-12 settings, but keeping in mind, the cultures, the backgrounds of the children that are being served, so you can tie in foods that are relevant culturally to those children. And then we host, and we'll talk about this more later, every other year a National Farm to Cafeteria Conference. So this is about 1,000 people who gather every other year to work on advancing farm to school, farm to early care and education, farm to hospital, farm to college, farm to prison. So it's been a program priority to integrate equity. And again, this is another way to put equity into action into event programming. So it's not just having a workshop track devoted to equity, but it's also requiring that anyone who submits a workshop proposal articulate how equity is going to be integrated into that workshop presentation. And it's also been reflected in keynote decisions, for example. And then lastly on this slide, as part of our journey, I'll mention that in our current 2017 to 2019, our strategic plans includes a very clear focus on advancing equity. So we've pulled out of our strategic plan essentially what we call an equity action plan or an equity dashboard, where we're regularly checking ourselves on metrics to ensure that our journey is continuing. It's not always linear. It goes forward, backwards, sideways, but we want to make sure, as I was saying a minute ago, that we're always doing something to continue to put equity into action through our work as a national network. A few other things that I'll mention related to our journey are some of the things that we've grappled with and had to answer for ourselves or are still answering. And, we're figuring this out, and we've decided that understanding words and what they mean really ultimately is foundational to doing the work. So, I gave an example earlier when we use staff calls to talk about a word, what its definition is, what it means in the context of farm to school. But some examples of that are things like the fact that a few years ago, one of our advisors said, what does equity mean? We were just referencing the work as equity. And he said, is that racial equity? Is that racial and social equity? You need to be very clear about what you mean by equity. And so now we use the phrase racial and social equity, recognizing that yes, there are inequities based on race and ethnicity, but there are many types of inequities in society, and we're tackling all of those at various levels. Another one of our board members has brought up, for example, disabilities and inequities based on disability. So we, for example, have promoted school garden tools and strategies that can be used for children with physical disabilities. So we had to really recognize what equity meant and really tease that out to be clear then about what we mean in the work that we're doing. And then we've also talked about promoting equity or advancing equity. What is the verb that goes with the work that we're doing? And we got some support and encouragement from one of our amazing funders to really think about how promoting equity is not really doing the work. That's just talking about it, but advancing it implies more action. It implies more that we are actually committed on a daily basis to doing this work. And then equity and justice. That's something that admittedly, I think as an organization, we still need to talk about, we still need to grapple with. I was recently at a procurement conference, and one of the speakers, who's also a great partner of ours, brought up the fact that there's equity and justice, and justice is equity plus reparation. So justice is acknowledging that there are inequities, but it's also talking about the history behind it, because history shows intentionality. There are reasons that inequities exist in our food system and in society. They've been intentionally designed that way. The structures, the policies have been designed that way. So I think it's something as an organization that we really need to continue to think about. Are we actually in the long term striving for justice? And I will share with you, many of you have probably seen this, for the example where you have 3 children who are at a baseball game and they are standing behind a fence. And so one option is equality. You give everybody, all three of the children, the same size step stool to try to see over the fence. Well, the children are three different heights. So the person who is the tallest and gets that box might actually therefore be able to see over the fence. But the child who's smallest and shortest, that box may not actually do enough to help her see over the fence. So that's equality. You give everybody the same thing, regardless of what their needs are. Equity is recognizing that the kids are different heights, and so they're going to need different things. You may give the shortest child the tallest box, so that ultimately everybody can see over that fence. And then justice, as has been described by many leaders in this work, is not having a fence at all, removing that fence so that you don't even need to talk about what size steps stool different people are getting based on their height, but just removing those barriers to being able to view that baseball field at all. And then finally, I'll just share as far as our role goes, we've really talked and reflected on what it means to be an ally in this work. So recognizing that there are the folks who are daily experiencing injustices and inequities in the food system and in society. So is the role of National Farm to School Network to really be an ally and to talk about those inequities and to demonstrate through our day-to-day work that we are committed to breaking down and addressing those. So with that, I am now going to pass it to my wonderful colleague, Alena, and she's going to share, based on that journey, what we've learned about our equity journey and work.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Well, it's afternoon now, but it's nice to see all of you on the phone. I wish I could see your faces. You're all hiding, but that's okay. That's something we've learned too. When having equity conversations, it's really great to create trust through face-to-face, which is why we have been, you might notice if you participate in our webinars, really preferencing Zoom as a platform because it allows for that opportunity to build relationship through visual. So I'll dig into the slide, but I just wanted to touch on that. As Helen mentioned, you know, this journey has been long for us, and it has been really critical for us to pause and to reflect and to try to, you know, continue to do that. It is a process of continuous learning. And so we like to really consider the work as a community of practice, both internally within our staffing and externally with our partners and all of you. And so a few things that we've learned is that establishing equity as a lens is really critical. And what I mean by that is that it's not a project. It's not a piece of your programming. It is a lens that you apply to everything that you're doing, both internally and externally. And so integrating that in internal operations, such as how you make staffing decisions, promotion decisions, how other operations function, like even when it comes to selecting spaces, caterers, all of those pieces that we are, you know, investing with our dollars and our power. For us, we recognize as a national network that we do have power as we're doing that. And so I think a great example is the Farm to Cafeteria conference in Cincinnati, and the outcome of the venue that we used actually procuring more local than they ever had and saying that they wanted to make that a practice. And that's something that we were able to encourage through our activity there. And so that's one of those long-term impacts where we're flexing sort of our power or sphere of influence as an organization. We're also working on messaging. So how we integrate equity as a lens into all of our messaging. And I'm going to say very transparently, this is something we're currently digging into. We've been doing coaching with an external equity coach, and we've been able to come to a place of acknowledging that we tend to use a lot of deficit-based language in this work. It's not just National Farm to School Network, it's all of us. When you have to write a grant proposal and you're trying to express why certain things need to be invested in, it's very hard not to get deficit-based. But that's one of those key pieces in messaging that we can fix relatively straightforward, and we're undergoing that right now. Also products. So we're on this call today to talk about our racial and social equity tool for programs and policy. That's a product, a resource we create and put out into the world. And so ensuring that the resources we're creating are working towards advancing equity and not just sort of maintaining status quo. And partnerships. As you know, our 2019 Partner of the Year is the Intertribal Ag Council, and that was very intentional. One, to be able to link with producers and have that side of the farm to school puzzle. But two, as Helen mentioned, working with Native communities has been a priority of ours, and I feel the need to just express that the difference there and why it's a priority is that we're looking at that from a lens of sovereignty and recognizing the policies that have been put in place in those particular communities and are maintained today. And so there's plenty of communities that could be focused on if we're talking about equity-focused work, and we recognize that. But for us, that key distinction of sovereign nations and how we can approach that through our national network. So this process is not something that you can just kind of pick and choose. It really, truly is transformative. And for me, and I think for all of us who have been on this journey for a few years, it becomes a part of your worldview as an individual, as a practitioner, both at home and professionally. And so that once you start feeling that piece, I like to think that we're actually doing really meaningful work together. So the process is key. So this is one of these things where we all aim for equitable outcomes, but if the process isn't equitable, how can the outcome be? And I think that's something that we're digging into and that we're all struggling with across the movement, across all kind of social justice work, but recognizing that participatory research, community-based practices, things that really center those most impacted are the ways to help ensure equitable outcomes. And then I just like to remind people, this is hard work. It is personal. You cannot do this work only in your professional self. It is not possible. And we all bring all of those different pieces of our unique personal journey to the work. And that's very, very important because it impacts how we are practitioners to advance equity. And everybody is different. And that diversity is how we're going to be impactful. And, you know, obviously if it's personal, it is emotional. And this work can be very hard, both for those that are experiencing inequities on a regular basis, or those that are in proximity to inequities, or those that are in proximity or experiencing privilege. So just want to acknowledge that it is tough work, it is emotional. So you need to have tools and practices, both internally and externally, to be able to create meaningful, constructive conversation. And not get kind of caught in that emotional piece and not compromise when people start getting uncomfortable. It's a two-sided piece. You want everybody to be comfortable, so you need to create an equal platform for engagement as much as possible. And then, you know, to say this work means there are decisions and consequences to those decisions. It's kind of tough for me to say because I feel like it's kind of controversial to just say, like, if you can't stand for something, if we can't put our time, our energy, our funding, our relationships behind something, then we're really not standing for equity. And I think Helen mentioned this in the concept of promoting versus advancing equity. So if you're not on the front line there, if you're not putting your skin in the game, then you're really not helping to solve the problem. You might be part of the kind of support group, but you're not actually utilizing your position, your privilege, your power, whatever that looks like, to help advance equity. And under that, you know, it's a scary process. And so I think a big thing we've learned is just be transparent, like Helen mentioned, tell our story, ask for help. A lot of our partners are well-versed in this and could train us so many times. And here we are having trainings with you guys, and we recognize that there are no experts in this work. There absolutely are not. There are some that have more experience and more opportunity to flex these muscles. And so reaching out to people, being honest, and asking partners, friends, relatives to help you learn is acceptable and is something, you know, that I think is key to having lasting impact. The other piece is just understanding and feeling that, you know, this is a bigger movement. There are other ways of support out there. And so I think Helen mentioned, you know, we're looking at equity, not just through food systems, but in other systems, and understanding that there's tools, there's organizations that have been doing that work for a long time. And so how can we work with them to carry some of those lessons into our food systems, and more specifically farm to school work, understanding that this has roots in many other areas. For instance, for those of you that were at the annual meeting, a lot of the work that we shared had come from sort of environmental planning and housing criteria, and talking about equity and injustices in the housing structures in our nation. And a lot of those lessons and tools can work to address other systemic inequities. So can I see the next slide? Helen, you want me to jump into it?
Sure, thanks, Alena. Yeah, I'll jump back in here and then pass it back to Alena. So I mentioned this earlier, but equity has been central to the National Farm to School Network's work, you know, since our founding, you know, as illustrated in those core values that I showed a few minutes ago. And there's also been that recognition, as has been discussed by both Alena and myself for the last few minutes, that we need to put equity, in quote, into action. And that's been a recognition both on the part of staff, of our advisory board, and of our core and supporting partners and members around the country. So towards that end, and this is part of our strategic plan to develop this tool, last year, so in 2018, we reviewed a lot of resources to help ourselves and other organizations further this work. So we realized that we needed to be intentional about a focus at NFSN on racial and social equities, for all the reasons I articulated earlier. And since we are an organization that serves as a hub for programming and for advocacy, so we needed to make sure through the work that we are doing on programs, on policy, and really also on partnerships, that we check ourselves. So when we are considering launching a new project with a partner or, an investor in Farm to School, or when we're considering advocating or endorsing a policy, we wanted to develop a tool that could really check ourselves to make sure that we had done as much as we possibly could to maximize our impact on advancing equity. So I can share in a second a couple of examples of what this has looked like for us, and then I will also pass it to Alena so she can really help guide us through doing some practice, because that's what this work takes. And again, the idea is really to, when you're building these new programs or policies, make sure we've considered everything that we should have considered to maximize impact on advancement of equity. So as staff, a few months ago, so I mentioned earlier that every month as staff, we connect on equity. So one of the things we did a few months ago was actually do a quote unquote practice with this tool. And so we used two relevant recent examples. The first was thinking about where we were going to be hosting our 2020 conference. And, we'll come back to that at the end to make sure y'all know to save the date. But we realized that when we are making a decision about where to host a national conference and how that site selection ties into programming, there's an equity component to that. So are we thinking about and honoring, for example, the communities that once inhabited the land? So ultimately, we decided that we're going to be going to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because there are a lot of communities that are doing incredible work there now on farm to school and food systems, and we want to elevate and honor and lift up that, both through our programming, selection workshops, but also through field trips. So that's one recent example where we went through the tool and realized it has impacts and it has information to inform site selection for our conference. And then a second example is that a number of states, Michigan included, being a gold standard for this, have been working on local procurement incentive policies. So basically, at the state level, this means state governments committing additional resources to child nutrition programs for buying local products for local school meal and child nutrition programs. So, most of you, if not all of you, are from Michigan, so you're probably well familiar with Michigan's 10-cent policy. So Michigan's done this, DC, New York, Oregon, New Mexico, a number of states have done this. And so it's an issue that we've heard from partners they'd like to see us one day consider pushing federally. So we actually use this tool as a kind of practice for thinking about a policy like this at the federal level. And one of the things that we realize is local procurement is but one of many values to lift up and elevate when it comes to incentive policy. So we started to talk about what it would mean through a federal policy to not just incentivize buying from local producers, but for example, from producers of color or small scale producers or those that don't regularly have access to the supply chains that we really through our values want to promote. So we haven't actually developed that federal policy and started to advocate for us, but using this tool with that example of a federal campaign in mind was really a light bulb moment for us to realize that we have got to, when we're advocating for programs, when we're advocating for policies, really consider how we craft those from the outset to ensure that they're going to maximize all of the values that are important to the National Farm to School Network and that are going to advance racial and social equity in the long run. So those are a couple of recent kind of practice examples. And with that, I'm now going to pass it back to Alena to lead us into this next section to really explain what's in the tool and to give you some guidance on how you can actually start to put the tool into action. And then if we have time, Colleen, I think we could even, hear from folks that are on the webinar about some examples of where we could kind of practice this today on the second half of our webinar.
Thanks, Helen. So as Helen mentioned, this tool was released originally, I believe in 2018 spring. Is that correct, Helen? Yes, spring of 2018. We worked with it internally on a few decisions, such as conference, some program and policy pieces, and then we had an opportunity to test it in a community setting with partners in New Mexico at a training they were doing around policy and equity. And it was great. It gave us an opportunity to see the areas that we needed to update this tool so that it could be useful to be implemented in larger group settings and in more participatory settings. If we're stating that the goal is around equity, we have to make it a tool that can be easily accessed by many. So we made some key updates. One of them is really just adjusting our language and trying to make sure that we're using language that is easily understood, that is not too academic or colloquial, and that means something, right? So like where we're putting in some of that grant speak, trying to reduce that and be actionable in the things that we're saying. And so we did update that tool. If you're not aware, that the version of the tool that's linked here is an updated version. And part of that was also restructuring how the tool functions. And so one of the pieces, if you dig into it, is that we in the upfront of it, we essentially built in an opportunity to set the stage for engagement with your team, whether that's your staff or a bigger community group. And so asking some big picture questions to make sure that everybody is sort of on the same page moving forward. It's asking you to identify values and goals that might not be immediately aligned to the initiative that you're proposing, but that will inform your lens of equity as an organization or a group or initiative. So that first page, which I'm tempted to try to screen share this tool. Helen, what do you think about that real quickly?
I think that would be great. Let me.
Here, I have it up. I think I can do it, right?
You got it? Okay, let me stop sharing then.
Thanks everyone for your patience. We're testing our new technology, but I have the tool up. I think it would be helpful for you guys to see what I'm speaking to as we are looking at it.
All right, there you go, Alena.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I apologize, it's very small, but it will give you a concept of what I'm talking about as I walk through this tool a little bit better, hopefully. So this first page here about setting outcomes with key stakeholders, that's what I was speaking of, that they're big picture. It's about setting values and intentions beyond the specific initiative, but is critical to making sure that you have the foundation you need in place, the partners at the table that need to be in place for the conversations you're having, all of those various pieces. This next piece starts to talk about more general food system questions, and the goal there is really to be able to understand how these different policies, initiatives need to be implemented to achieve the goals you set in your outcomes. So that is one piece. I'm just going to real quickly move through them. Great. And the food system specific questions are lengthy because, as you can see, I'll just pull out one question here. So we'll say this one. Would this program or policy lead to greater access to local foods for schools and early care and education sites serving communities of color or socially disadvantaged communities? So when we were first using this, we were like, well, it depends. All of these were an it depends, and we wanted an it depends checkbox. So we realized here is an opportunity to just kind of look at it at a superficial level, yes or no, and then write in your it depends here. So how would it need to be implemented to achieve your goal? Or why would you need to implement it differently to achieve your goal? Or why is it not structured to be equitable in its outcome? And so those are some of the pieces that we intentionally built in from an early point, recognizing that it was sort of tough to use in a community setting. The other piece is really looking at the intention, like the long-term impacts of your initiative. And so we have a policy analysis piece here that's really specific to policy, but that doesn't mean it's only federal or state level policy. It's local policy, it's organizational policy. And so it's talking about trying to identify sort of hidden inequities that might come up once this is implemented. And that's something that I think is tough to plan for. And so these questions are attempting to get you thinking in that direction. And then we were missing this piece about sustainability and accountability. So policy work is great. You get this policy through that's intended to create great impacts, that you've made sure that community is involved in, that it has an equity focus, but ultimately you're releasing that project to be implemented by somebody else. So you need to have a plan to hold people accountable to the standards that you put in that and the work that you put into the policy or program initially, as well as to make sure that the impacts and the initiative can be sustainable in that equity. And this is something that comes up quite a bit actually in farm to school policies. And I hear a lot from folks like, oh, we have this policy and we really were hoping that it would impact local producers, but gosh, then it got handed over and implemented, and now it's just impacting every producer, and people are crediting things they were already buying, and all those types of things we see happening when that was not the intention of most of these bills going forward. And so recognizing that, thinking through that, expressing that, and making sure your partners are on the same page is really critical up front. We also embedded into this tool some of the content that we just covered. So a little bit more about our journey and our core values, so that if you're using this in a community setting, you have that to lean back on to be able to speak to the value of having a foundation in place. And I think that's why we really wanted to start with our journey, is to say that this tool only could be created and only can be used in a meaningful way because we have a foundation. We have a values, core values around this. We have language we're working on developing around this. We're implementing it, and we have a history that we're speaking to. And so it's something to encourage for those of you looking to implement something with this tool, is to think about how could this be your page of saying your core values. And it might not be as long, and it might be some quick bullet points, or it might be a talking point that you actually bring into that meeting or setting. And I'm going to flip us back. Oh my. Helen, how can I go back to you now? Can you retake over the screen share?
Sure, yeah. So I think if you hit stop share, I will be able to start sharing.
Thanks everyone for being patient. Perfect.
That will help.
Right.
And so the one thing I just wanted to add is that that's kind of an overview of the tool. We're here. If you have questions, dig into it. Write me an email. My contact information is in there, as well as Helen. I'd love to learn how you're implementing it or any challenges that come up. The work is a journey, as are tools. We will always be updating. So that is a part of the process. And ultimately, we created this to help ourselves, and then saw that you all are really looking for it too. And so this is a tool for all of you. So our goal is to make sure that we are working in a similar way. That concept of creating a community of practice within National Farm to School Network means that we're working with a similar method, and we're understanding how we're moving forward, and we're supporting each other in that. So the first steps that if you do go to implement that I would recommend is just reviewing it. Not all of the questions are going to be relevant. So if you're the one hosting the meeting, or you have a core team, review the tool, slash out questions that aren't relevant, then start there. Add things if you need to. It can be used and it can be edited. And then do a practice round at your organization. And what I mean by that is those first couple of pages. I think it's really important, particularly if you're maybe one staff member or two of many that are digging into this work, to make sure that you have that conversation in your wheelhouse at home first, before you go out into community and try to implement this. You'll feel more supported. You'll feel like you're being clear about your organizational goals. And I really do think also it'll help your colleagues to see where you're headed and what the goals are, and create something that's more sustainable. So again, the tool is updated and available online. I'm not going to go any further into it because there are some questions popping up, and I'd rather directly address your questions. But please feel free to reach out at any time, and we can dig more into the tool if you have nitty-gritty pieces you want to chat about.
All right, so with that,
Colleen, yeah, we'll pass it back to you to guide us from here.
sure. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan, but in the interim, I wanted to, in line with your note from earlier, I'll go ahead and invite everyone to share their video as we get into this more discussion-based section, and see who's willing to show up there. But as I'm doing that, Megan, go ahead if you want to start asking questions for presenters. And for those who are on the line, if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll get to them as we're able.
Sure. So thank you, Alena and Helen. There was a lot of questions around deficit-based language, including asking for examples of deficit-based language. Someone asking if using socially disadvantaged communities is deficit-based language and whether there's a better, what other terms could be used. And then there was a really interesting one, I think, about in terms of if you're running a grant program that's need-based, how in a grant application do you ask for about need without using deficit-based language? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, Alena, feel free to jump in, but I'll just say that we're both smiling because this is something that we've grappled with, including, you know, in federal statute, there is that term socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And we're, you know, we do policy as an organization and we've used that term for years, but now recognize it is deficit based. So Alena, jump in and then I can fill in as needed.
Sure. Okay, so the first piece, I'm sorry, there was like 3 questions rolled in there. So an example of deficit-based language. Okay, food deserts. So food deserts is a great example of deficit-based language. So if you're writing your grant proposal and you want to articulate that there's low availability and access points for healthier local foods in a certain community, it's really tempting to rely on food desert data. And specifically with the communities I work with, Native communities, we're all classified food deserts, right? And the reality is we know on the ground as practitioners, as community members, that we are not in a food desert. We are simply in the Western frame of how access is identified. We are considered in a food desert. However, we have access to our traditional foods, local foods. There is much more happening below the surface there. And so by superficially using terms like food desert, which are valuable, but not always the truth. And so, you know, I think a lot of folks on the call probably have some learning around this. There's new terms that have come up recently. You know, food swamp is one that people talk about a lot when it's not about talking about the negatives. So a food desert being barren, lacking access, no resources, but a food swamp is flipping that actually. It's actually not deficit-based because you're saying, no, what we're going to point out is that there's an overwhelming abundance of unhealthy food outlets. And so that's like one great term that's just really easy to identify. I think we really get caught a lot around citing data that relates to health standards that are, again, measured in one particular way. They might just be quantitative versus looking at the qualitative pieces. And so to the best, I will say it's a challenge. And the best thing that we've been able to do is just try to paint a complete picture, not single story, a community or an individual. So yes, folks are suffering from type 2 diabetes at an overwhelming rate. And it is because of A, B, C, D by design. So taking it back to the systemic implication instead of pinning it on the individuals. That seems to be very successful, and it's a way of removing that prejudice, that bias that comes with pinning it on individual behavior. And then one of our conversations recently with our equity coach, I brought up that question directly about grants. Like, okay, if we're in a needs-based grant, how do we do it? How we have to, you know, sometimes you have to paint the worst possible picture so that somebody will understand and become active to support your work. And it's okay to use the real data. She recommended sandwiching it. And so she started with acknowledging the issue that exists. So there is a disparity of access to healthy food. Then you sandwich in a community asset. However, because there are, you know, there's also a numerous amount of producers in the community, there is an opportunity for increasing access. However, there's a lack of healthy water and dirt. However, and so doing as much sandwiching as you can to paint the picture towards a solution. Don't be afraid of naming it, but name it structurally, not individually or against particular groups, has been, I guess what I would share has been my biggest learning. And I'll say we're working on this, and it is really, really tough, particularly when you're working with partners who are sometimes mandated to only work in certain levels of need, right? Or programs. And Helen mentioned socially disadvantaged as a term. trust me, we wanted to take it out. We had a deep conversation about it. It is deficit-based language. We know that. However, because we work in federal policy, because it aligns with the language that our partners use, we felt the need to keep it in there for alignment purposes. But that's a great conversation to have, right? How can we help advance that term and remove that term and have our partners looking towards something that's a little bit less deficit-based? So I'll pause there. I know there was 3 questions. I hope I got them all, but I'll let Helen jump in.
And Megan, clarify, but I think I understood that one of the other questions is if you were managing or running a grant program, how you ask questions of applicants?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, Alena, jump in here. I mean, we've dealt with that where through our Seed Change program, we, for example, prioritize certain communities to receive funds. So in our work with Native communities. So when we put out a request for applications, we, say percentage free and reduced price lunch at the school district, for example. I don't know, Alena, I guess we've done that. So I'm curious, Alena, if you have thoughts.
It's tricky. It's really tough when you're using a metric to make a decision and you're trying to be as unbiased as possible, right? Like that's where that piece is coming in. And so I guess what I would encourage is, again, to look at your metric and embed in some assets that you feel like help bridge the deficits. So, going back to the ideas of, food access, you can talk about free and reduced food and hunger rates, but then maybe also talk about access to gardens at home or in your community. Like find a way to put in another metric that starts breaking down cultural barriers, frankly. Like step outside your own worldview for all of us and start to identify things that might be assets that we just don't understand, or ask questions of your partners. That's a great time to ask the questions. If you have someone, one of your former grantees, for instance, if it's an ongoing grant program that you can have an honest conversation with, I would start there and I would ask them, how could this be more meaningful? And this is a little bit irrelevant, but I think it's a good example. If you'll go there with me, but like in procurement, for instance, I've worked on some local bids and we were trying to figure out how to ensure that small scale producers would get a preference without stating it. We talked to producers and we found out that waxing produce was something that no small scale producers do. So we were able to put that in as one of the specs that really effectively actually limited it down to the certain population without having to name that to be deficit in it. So it's just like thinking a little abstractly is what I would recommend, and then balancing it with positive assets as much as you can. So parent involvement, family involvement, community involvement, multi-generational involvement, those are often things that you can measure that might present in areas that are otherwise considered having suffering disproportionately from deficits. And that's another thing that our coach has been working with us on, is saying it like that, right? So like not communities that that are marginalized, but saying they are disproportionately impacted. So just being cautious about how you're using it. And again, not naming it back to the community, but to the structures that create the impacts on the community. I hope that is a helpful answer to that question.
I think so. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to skip around a bit in the questions that were asked, because there was one in particular got a couple of votes. And then I'm going to lump it in with another question that just came through. So the question was, have any elements of your equity work been controversial or alienated partners? And how have you navigated perceptions of going too far versus not going far enough? And then someone just asked if an FSN had heard of the term food apartheid, and if so, have you discussed using that term to reinforce the institutional and systematic forces at play? So maybe those two can go together as you discuss, in doing this work, have you lost people or have you gained people, and how do you balance the opinions on either side when emotions run high?
I'll jump in and then Helen jump in over me, because I can only speak to the more recent history around this work. But in general, you are going to potentially alienate some people. And I think that's something we've, again, worked with our coach a lot on. And someone did ask about the coach. We have an external equity coach for this reason exactly, so that we can ask these questions. You know, we're staff. Our job is to serve all of you and our partner base, and to do that in the best way we can. And so we never want to alienate our partners. That's never a goal. And so it's really tough. So we rely on her for that, as well as some of the internal decisions where it's helpful to have a third party. And her recommendation in terms of that staffing piece is that you can look at separating your external relations around advancing equity and your internal. And an internal is a great place to either have someone that's like in administration that doesn't deal with your staff every day, or a consultant. And so she's been doing that work with us. But her recommendation was essentially that if you just stand in your own truth and you're honest about why you're there, and people become alienated, and that's just a consequence that can happen, essentially. And you do your best to bridge that. You tell your story, you explain, you try to break it down, ask questions, keep the conversation going. But essentially at some point, it comes down to whoever's in the room is in the room for a reason. And that's how these calls are, right? We're all here for a reason. We probably each wish we had colleagues that were here alongside us. They're not. You can't drag people to it. You can't force people into this work. So we've learned that. And then, you know, I think it is really tough for us, because we do work with a lot of folks, like some of you on this call, I'm sure, that are forced to wear a certain set of values for your professional life that might not align with your personal life. And so we don't ever want to put you in a place where you feel like those are at odds, or it's being creating negative impacts for you. And so the goal is to try to get always to the personal. And in that way, if you get past people with maybe their agency hats or their funder hats or whatever it is, and get to the real individual in there, people are willing to have those conversations and say, look, I just can't do it because we can only talk about equality. That's something that comes up a lot in farm to school, right? Everybody has to have equal access. We understand that that is not equity, but it's a spectrum, and working towards equality is great. And working with partners that are advancing equity makes that more impactful. So understanding the different roles of people, and at some point just accepting it, unfortunately, as part of the journey, and as an opportunity to improve your skills around communicating your own equity journey and goals.
Yeah, and this is Helen. I will jump in. And can you all hear me on the computer?
Yes.
Great. It just occurred to me that this entire time you all have not been able to see my face because I was using my phone to talk. So I sincerely apologize for that. I am having a bit of an internet issue, so please, Megan, let me know if it does cut out.
Okay.
So what I want to add to this is that absolutely, yes, we have had not just questions, but pushback. So I mentioned that starting in 2013 at our annual meetings, we started doing equity trainings. At that meeting, it became pretty rowdy. We had people asking how in the world equity was related to farm to school. We had one person, stand up and, say, are you indicating that because my son is a white male, that automatically means he's racist? It has been a journey for us. Another example is a couple of years ago at our annual meetings, we started using the word equity on the program agenda for our annual meetings. So we work with a lot of different state partners, and that includes folks that work for the government, so state agencies of agriculture, education. And we actually had some of our partners that work at state agencies unable to attend our annual meeting because state agencies work with everyone, they represent everyone, and by having the word equity on the program agenda, it was indicating perhaps that we weren't working with everyone. So after that experience, we wanted to make sure all of our partners could come to future annual meetings, so we stopped calling it equity. We started saying on the program, farm to school for all. And I will tell you that this most recent annual meeting, we put it back on there. We had an internal discussion, we talked to our consultant, and as Alena said, we recognize that it may mean that not everyone is able to show up and everyone doesn't have the ability to be there or want to be there. But this is the work, this is the organization, and so we need to name it, we need to call it out. We've talked throughout this entire webinar about the importance of language, and calling it farm to school for all was too fluff. We need to talk about how we need to address inequities and advance access to farm to school. And so we really had to be intentional. And I will tell you, a month ago when we were at our annual meeting, when we got to that section of the program, there were people who left the room. There are certain folks who continue to ask why it's relevant, but as Alena said, we recognize that this is the work. This is why NFSN was founded, and we're at a place as an organization we're not going to shy away from being intentional about it. The last thing I'll say is Alena mentioned this, it's about messaging it and it's about articulating it, and that's something that we're realizing we need to better do. So for example, if you look at our equity commitment statement on our website, it talks about lots of different inequities in the food system, from a land standpoint, from an access standpoint, and everything in between. But what we haven't done, that our consultant has pushed us to do, is explain the history behind that. So explain why there are inequities and who has access to, who owns land in the United States, for example, the policies that have been put in place over decades to get us to that point, because explaining that history may help for some of those people who don't understand the relevance, understand that it's structural, it's institutional. It's not like we're pointing the finger saying, if you're a white person, you personally have created this. Yes, we all need to work at that personal level, as Alena said, but it's really calling to the attention to the fact that this has been broader societal efforts that have been put in place to create these inequities.
Helen and Alena, I want to thank you so much for your presentation today and your robust answers. I want to apologize to the participants that we couldn't get to all of their questions. A lot of them were asking about recommendations for facilitators and trainings, and we will circle back to you. I think there was just one short question. I think it has a short answer that you could answer really quickly, and then I know that you have one last slide. Someone asked on the tool if there was a minimum score that is needed.
Yeah, so this is indicated in the tool. Sorry, let me go the other way on video.
This is indicated in the tool, but the goal is ultimately to be able to answer yes to all of the questions, but there's no minimum. As Alena and I both articulated, it's work in progress. It's a journey. So start wherever you are. Don't feel, bad that you're not at answering yes to all of them. Neither is National Farm to School Network. We still aren't. And then regarding the questions that are coming up around suggested trainers and facilitators, please do feel free to reach out to Alena and myself. It's something that we're starting to do ourselves, so leading trainings around the country. So we'd be happy to have those conversations with you all. And just can't thank Megan and Colleen enough for this opportunity to talk about this important work.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that and say thank you. It's so great to be able to chat with you guys and just keep talking about what we're doing. And I want to honor Jordan's question about food apartheid. I dug into it a little bit, and I appreciate you bringing it up. It is something that we will be discussing. We've just started really using the word food sovereignty intentionally. And so I think that we're in the process of defining terms for ourselves. And I just want to acknowledge that that is a great thing that you brought up. And I'm going to carry that with me forward. Yeah, so thank you all. I really appreciate it. And again, on that scoring question thing, like maybe set a goal for yourselves is what I would recommend in that first meeting. Set a goal, a reasonable one, and say how many boxes do we want in the yes, how many in the no, and what can we be satisfied by is how I would start on that. But thank you all. Again, reach out. We will send some information about coaching if that's helpful for folks. And yeah, we're in it with you. And so just reach out to us, and we hope we can help be a coach to you in this process.
And Helen, did you want to flip to your next slide about upcoming events? All right.
Thank you, words Helen. You want? Forgot to do that. So yes, we, as has been discussed, are an advocacy organization. So we do monthly trending topics webinars, and the June 6th one is about the Child Nutrition Act reauthorization that includes school lunch, school breakfast, CACFP, summer. So you can find more on our website, farmtoschool.org. And then there's that conference that we host every other year, headed to Albuquerque, April 20th through 24th, so save the date. And then every October, we celebrate National Farm to School Month. So want to make sure you all are starting to think about how to celebrate farm to school in your communities. And again, you can find out more about all of this on our website.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Alena, and thank you all for your participation and your great questions, and I look forward to more conversations about this topic. We will have a recording of this presentation available in the very near future, and we'll be sure to share that out through all of our communication channels. So hopefully if you found out about this webinar through one of those, you will also see this recording there, and feel free to share it. And as our presenters said, feel free to be in touch with them with any additional questions or to let them know how you're using or adapting this tool. And also feel free to be in touch with me or my co-host today, Megan, if you'd like to learn more about any of our work with the Michigan Farm to Institution Network and the Michigan Local Food Council. So with that, thank you. Have a good